The mules are in the corral. Welcome to Mule Talk, and I'm Cindy K. Roberts, your host.
On this episode of Mule Talk, we have back our author, TV personality, and world-renowned mule trainer, Meredith Hodges of the Lucky 3 Ranch. Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about leverage versus abuse.
Yes, we are, and it's good to be back, and this is a wider subject than you even realize, When you're talking about leverage, a lot of people want to just be able to force their animals to comply, but the whole resistance-free training thing that's been taking place, I've watched a lot of people that propose to do resistance-free training, and there's a lot of resistance in there. They think they have conquered it, but I set out to really make sure that my training was truly resistance-free. And that took a lot of thought on my part to do that.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of things that you do that you feel that you have to make sure that the animal does. Most of us get very impatient about this. And I liked your question about what to do with a rescue animal that tends to bolt and run. You're being patient with him, but it's going to take a little while before he actually stops pulling on you. And when he's pulling on you, that creates resistance right there, right off the bat. So that was one of the things I really had to think about carefully, is how to completely eliminate resistance in lieu of particularly animals that I was getting that were rescues, and they were already taught to bolt and run. They were taught not to comply. They were taught, and this is why they were a rescue. This is why they were sent away. This is why I got them, because they had problems that nobody else could really address. And being patient wasn't quite enough.
That is the correct answer.
So I had to break it down and decide, okay, what am I going to do if they bolt and run? And say I use my quick twist restraint on them, which is nothing more than taking your lead rope and taking it through your nose band and up and over the lower part of their nose, so that when you pull on it, it puts pressure on their nose and cuts off their air, almost entirely, but not quite. Usually on an animal that has been with me from the beginning and just kind of does that offhand, they know the reward system. They know they're going to get something for it. And even with a rescue, you begin in your feeding situation where you have taught them to come to you and never go in the pen and chase them. Just stand there at the gate or at the stall door. Ask them always to come to you. So they've already learned that they're going to be rewarded if they come to you. So taking that concept into leading training, when these rescues are prone to bolt and run and drag you all over the place, I have found that, first of all, you make the decision to do the training in a confined area in the beginning, because you know they're going to bolt and run.
Sure.
So you go out there, and sure enough, here they do. They bolt and run. And I teach you with the quick twist to stand your ground, let them go ahead and take the slack out of the lead rope and pull on it. And if you can hold it, you just stand your ground. Don't let them pull them off your feet if you can help it. But if you feel that you're coming off your feet and they're going to drag you, you're in a confined area, so just let go. Let them think they won. And they'll run off, and then they'll turn around, and they'll wonder why you're not chasing them. And so,
All
yeah.
right.
They always want to win the game,
Yeah.
But if you don't play,
Right.
if you don't play the game, what are they going to do?
It's like a game show. And
Yeah, it is. It is. And so what you do then is they will, a certain distance, they all have a different distance they're going to run before they stop and turn around and look at you. And they're turning around and going, well, why aren't you running after me? And you just reach in your fanny pack, take a handful of oats and drip them back into the fanny pack, and you go, well, I don't have to chase you because I have the good stuff. So if you want any of this, like you did when you were haltering them, you go, you got to come over here. And so you teach them that you're not going to play the game. If they pull on you and try to bolt and run, and you can't hold your stance there, then they're going to have to come back to you because you're not going to chase them. You absolutely are not going to chase them. And you make no bones about it with them. And they learn this very quickly, and they will come back to you. So if you exercise that kind of patience, then they'll come back, and you'll give them the oats. You'll take the lead rope. And if they try it again, you go ahead and try to hold your stance because they will try it again. You hold your stance, but I'll tell you, you'll notice that the next time they do it, they won't pull as hard to try to get you off your feet. But if they do, then you just let go again. And then you ask them to come back, give them the oats, wait for them to finish chewing, let them know. And if they pull on you again and they stop just short of trying to drag you off your feet, then you call that a lesson and you give them their oats when they come back to you, because they will. They've learned that from running off and not having you chase them. And then they come back and you give them the oats and you go, okay, this is enough. Now we're going back to the barn. And they'll know that you're headed for the barn again and that you're not going to try anything more. If they do, you just let go again, call them back to you as many times as you have to between the arena and the barn. That's just the way it is.
Sure.
You know, and if they cannot be trusted to lead to the arena, then just do this training in their pen until you feel confident that you can get them to the arena. You don't want to lead into an open area where they can go and run all over the place and make you chase them. That's just not something you really want to do. So you want them to learn this lesson that we're not playing this chase game at all, not ever.
That is the correct answer.
The other thing that's really important is when they're running around, they are just reinforcing their own bad posture because they're not running in any good posture. They're running the way they usually do. And like people, they do not travel in good posture without that being corrected. And it's just like my grandmother when she put a book on my head and she said, you're going to be a sorry old woman if you don't learn to walk in good posture and use good manners. Well, you use that same concept with your mules. So the first and most important restraint that we're going to use to give us leverage to get them in good posture and have developed self-carriage, which is really important for that, is putting this elbow pull on. And you have to realize that in order for this to work, they have to be in self-carriage. That means you can't pull on them because you're pulling them off balance. And everything about good posture is about being in a good equine balance. That means that they have equal weight over all 4 feet, that they're stretching their spine from head to tail and carrying their body in a good, solid posture, which means the bones are aligned and the development of all of the elements around the bones are being addressed so they develop symmetrically around those bones. So any interference that you may cause is going to cause strength asymmetrically around the bones. So you're not developing good posture if you get into any kind of resistance with them. They have to be willing to put their head at your shoulder, and they have to know what you're asking. And that's why when we put them in the elbow pull, which goes over their pole, down through the bit rings, between the front legs and over the back, and it is adjusted so they can raise their head high enough so they are not able to hollow their neck and their back, but they have free range of motion to put their head all the way to the ground and all the way to both sides. So it leaves a lot of freedom of motion that other restraints that people use do not allow, like side reins and martingales, draw reins, and all the different things that they use to control the animal. And most of those things, all they do is cause them to give it the pull and bend their neck. But they don't really address whether or not they're going to hollow their back or not. It may prevent them from hollowing their neck, but it doesn't help them with their back. The elbow pull does. It addresses all those core muscles in the way that they're aligned with the bones. That prevents a lot of problems that these guys can get later by traveling in their own posture, which is not correct. It can cause colic, founder, allergies, soreness, arthritis in excess, because they don't stretch across their spine when they're moving. It can cause kissing spine, which is where the spinous processes start rubbing against each other in their back because they're all compressed, and then they end up getting sway back and they're sore in the back. They can get ring bones, side bones, shin splints, and all those kinds of things from the legs being out of alignment and the joints not being used properly. All of this can be explained in physics because there is an ideal way, if you think of those bones as lines in physics and the joints as being fulcrums where those lines move, in order to get that all in line so that you don't have asymmetrical development and consequently the wrong kind of movement happening, then you won't have the problems. And the elbow pull is the only thing that I know that gives them the freedom of movement to be able to really learn how to move their body correctly, because instead of holding the lead rope under their chin, we're going to hold it on the left hand while we're standing on the left side, and we're going to point in the direction of travel so that they won't walk circles around you. They'll know where you're going. You're going to look in the direction of travel. You're going to travel in straight lines and gradual arcs, no abrupt movements to startle them or set them off balance in any way, shape, or form. And then you are going to match your steps with theirs. So when you tell them to walk on, you look down and see what front foot they're leading with, and you lead with the same foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, and match their, the way that they're moving. And this way, it completely eliminates any resistance because you are walking in sync with each other. And that's what makes this elbow pull such an amazing restraint. It's a reminder of good posture to them because when they raise their head too high, it stops them. And oddly enough, too, when you have the animal in a snaffle bridle, don't use a curb bit, in a snaffle bridle with this elbow pull on and everything, they do not raise their head. They cannot raise their head higher than it takes to invert their neck. They can get their head higher than the withers so they can move freely, but if they try to put their head above where it starts to invert their neck, that's actually the point when they get the upper hand when they're bolting. They invert that neck, open their mouth if it's got a bit in it. They lean against the noseband of the halter, which gives them leverage to pull against you. So I have found that when they're in the elbow pull rigging with a surf single or a light saddle and the snaffle bridle, they very rarely try to run off or bolt because it makes it really hard for them to do that. It's really hard when you're concentrating on stretching your spine to do exactly the opposite and bolt and run. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah.
So this does give you a lot of leverage when you're doing your leading training. And then again, you leave it on when you're lunging, you leave it on when you're ground driving, and you leave it on for the whole first year of riding, because that just reminds them you have to stay in this good posture. That's really important. What's also very important at this stage was when you're introducing the tack and equipment, you don't want anything that's going to cause distraction, because then again, causes distraction, they get sore or they lose their attention on you, and then they want to bolt and run and get away from it. It's important what kind of halter you use. If you use one of those rope halters with the knots in it, those things are a constant source of aggravation. All you have to do is put your finger under your ear, and you don't even have to push on it, to know that if that stays under your ear for any length of time, it's going to become obnoxious. And you're not going to like it. You're going to want to do something to it because it's distracting. But if you put the palm of your hand underneath your ear and you feel that, kind of feels like a caress. It feels comfortable. It doesn't distract you from anything. And that's the way a nylon halter feels to the animal, especially when you have it adjusted properly. You don't want the noseband too big or too loose, and you don't want the throat latch too tight. So the adjustment of the halter is also extremely important so that it won't cause any distractions. Because when they have things that cause distractions, like if something's too tight or too loose or anything like that, and it's flopping around their head, they're going to get tired of it, and they're going to want to exit stage right. That's what they do. Same thing with your bridle. Now, a lot of animals don't like the bits that you use, and there's a ton of different bits out there that you can use, and people usually think of them in terms of leverage, so I can stop this animal. But if you're taking things slowly and patiently, and you're doing the leading training, for instance, you're going to have a halter over the bridle and the elbow pull and all of that, so you're going to be leading from the halter. This gives them time to adjust to the bit. The other thing that I do too is I don't like Western bridles in training at the beginning because they don't have nosebands. They used to. They used to have nosebands on Western bridles, but they don't do that anymore. And even if they only had one noseband. But I've found that the English bridles with the drop nosebands that you can fasten behind and in front of the bit, will teach the animal how to hold the bit properly in his mouth. The most mild bit that I have ever found, the one that they get most comfortable with, is the egg butt snaffle bit. Some animals don't like the joint in the middle, so I use an egg butt snaffle hinged bit with a mullen mouth, which is a straight bar, and whatever they happen to feel comfortable with. And you can tell whether they're comfortable or not in the bit by how much the tongue is flopping over the bit. And the beauty of this double noseband is that it doesn't allow them much leeway in flopping that tongue around. It encourages them to go ahead and put that tongue underneath the bit where it belongs and leave it there, and learn to lift the bit with their tongue towards the palate, the upper palate, and hold the bit such that the rings that are on either side of the lips will just stay stationary. You want that bit to fit that mouth so that it does. You don't want it too big, and you don't want it too small, because you have to realize that that is where the connection to your hands is going to be through the reins. So you want them to be able to feel the smallest movement that you make with your hands, the vibration that goes down that rein to the corner of their mouth. Now, if that bit is offset, they're not going to be able to really feel that vibration that you're sending there. And it's usually, I just send it with my little fingers. I don't hold my hand in a fist on the reins.
Right.
Because I want my animals light in the bridle. And if I was to hold it like a fist, then that would create tension. They'd go, oh, what am I doing wrong? She's not giving me the freedom I need to have to do what she's asking. these are little details that most people don't think about. And most people think about the bit in terms of having the leverage to stop the mule. But when you're constantly riding on it, or you start training with, say, a curb bit, which has a shank on it, then you're actually creating soreness at their mouth because they haven't even really learned how to respond yet, and you haven't set them up so that they know what you're asking. When you use an egg butt snaffle bit and a drop nose band on the bridle, and you get that tongue securely in place, then they begin to realize, oh, I'm supposed to take this mouthpiece with my tongue and hold it there nicely. And then she will, after they've been through the hourglass pattern for 3-6 months, they know how to hold the bit. So when you go to the round pen, and then first you're lunging, that's more the same. When you're leading through the obstacles, more of the same. So it's like 18 months before you hit the ground driving stage, and they actually feel your hands there. But by that time, they have learned to carry that bit in the right place, and they can feel the vibrations from your little finger, and they know they're supposed to keep their nose on the vertical and not raise it too high, although the elbow pull will let them get in front of the bit, but it does not encourage them getting behind the bit. It's not restrictive that way. So they actually learn to travel in good balance, which makes them step well underneath with their hindquarters. The impulsion is coming from the hindquarters. And most people, because they do things defensively with animals, they want to disengage those hindquarters because they don't want to give the animal the power that comes from initiating any movement from the hindquarters. That's what happens when they're bolting. They get that impulsion from the hindquarters, and you're toast, So this is why it's more of a partnership between you. You have discussions with your mule or your horse or your pony or whoever it is. You have discussions about what's comfortable for them, because every individual, has different levels of pain, response. And so some of them, it doesn't matter. You can pound on them all day long, and they don't care. And I'll talk about something else when we hit the face tie on that, because it's pretty funny. You want to set it up with your tack and equipment so that they are comfortable, and so you're negotiating with each other, and nobody is the leader in this situation at all. And they get rewarded when they're doing the right thing, and you need to be prompt with your rewards and reward little victories along the way, and know when to stop the lesson. Like I told, if they get to the third time and they've come back to you in the arena and they're standing there and they don't pull on you again, that's a good place to stop. That's where you stop the lesson. You got plenty of time to come back for further lessons and actually do some leading. And like I said, when you are leading, make sure that you're walking straight lines and gradual arcs and not creating anything that will startle them. The chains that people use to control animals are really not beneficial at all. And they do end up causing sores, calcified areas, calluses and stuff on their face. They are required in a halter showmanship class. But it is not good to put the chains over the nose particularly. You will find that if you do that, your animal is going to develop a bump right in the middle of their face on their nose. If you put it under their chin and attach it to the ring that's still on the nose band, it will create a bump or a callus mark underneath the chin. And if they want to bolt and run, they can still do it. Like I said, they've got a lot of resistance to pain. And if they know that if they pull you off your feet and jerk that line out of your hands, that the pain won't be there anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of pointless to even try to use a lead shank with a chain on it for leverage. If you have to go into your showmanship class and you have to use it, then the right way to do it is to put it through the loop on the noseband on the side you're standing on, the left side usually, and then run it through under their chin, through the loop on the other side of the noseband, but then attach it up by the throat latch, on the ring that's up by the throat latch. And then be sure to keep your animal's head at your shoulder like you have trained him to do, and try to keep that line as loose as possible so you don't have to even use it to lead him. And after they've gone through all of this training with leading the way that you do, where you're pointing in the direction, by the time you hit a showmanship class, you still need to walk in sync with their legs. That's important. You still need to use your verbal commands to walk on, and you still need to look where you're going and execute it with gradual arcs and straight lines. But you don't necessarily have to point in the direction of travel, which would look strange in the showmanship class.
Sure.
You can eliminate that piece of it, and they will still stay by your side like they were trained to do. And so another thing I might mention too is when we're doing our tacking equipment and everything like that, it's really important how you fasten that stuff together. There's a lot of, newfangled fads out there, that people think they're being really smart about fitting saddles to your mule and everything. But I've found through the use of my 1972 two circle-wise saddles and a longhorn saddle that when you ride bareback on a horse, there's a groove where your legs fall. And the difference with a mule is there's muscle there. So I just took my saddles that I'd been riding in my whole life, and in 1980, I rode with them the way they were from 72 to 1980 when I moved out to Colorado. And then I got a whole bunch of mules of my own. I was only training the weanlings and yearlings at my mom's ranch, so I wasn't doing a heck of a lot of riding. And the riding I did do, I used one of her saddles. When I got here to Colorado, then I had a whole herd of mules of my own, and I had to train them, and I had to have a saddle that fit. And there were a lot of guys that were making mule saddles, but it seemed like those saddles would fit one mule, but wouldn't fit another one.
Right.
So I had my saddle maker go ahead and shave the tree in the gullet. I took them apart, all three saddles, took them apart, shaved that part of the tree that has the bulge in it to accommodate the indentation on a horse. And once I did that, my saddles fit all my mules.
Wow.
And I've been using the same saddles for 44 years. And they are holding up really well because we keep them conditioned.
Right.
And because I clean them after I ride them. Mm-hmm. When you have dirty tacking equipment, that will actually cause chafing on your mule's body, which again is another distraction that they don't like, So that again is part of your leverage, is making sure that your tacking equipment fits, is clean, so it doesn't rub. I have used Navajo blankets and with fleece pads if I have a thoroughbred type mule that has bigger withers, but most of them, all I had to use was a double-sided Navajo blanket with them, and then just make sure that when I put that saddle on, I go ahead and run my arm, pull up the blanket and run my arm all the way down the spine before I tighten the girth. When I have a double-rigged saddle, I know that they put the double rigging on those saddles a long time ago, and I actually knew why they did that was because when people were roping, the back of the saddle would come up. And so their solution to that problem was to put a back girth on it. But you learn to only put it on there snugly so it just lays across the barrel. Mm-hmm. But you go ahead and let all that rigging hang. The other thing that you want to do on the front girth is you want to make sure that you've got that saddle placed in the middle of the torso, right over the center of gravity. And if you do, that front girth is going to come right underneath, but it's not going to be right behind the forearm where the thin skin is. It's going to be where the barrel starts to swell, where the thicker skin is. And at this point, I might urge you to use a cotton string girth there, because those cotton string girths will move with the skin, and they keep that area aerated underneath the girth, because if it's a solid girth, it's going to create sweat, and it's going to create rubbing and chafing again, because it won't move with the animal's skin. The back girth, I use leather back girths. I don't need the string girths back there because they're not going to be tight enough to rub. But you go ahead and just bring them up, and both girths should be perpendicular to the ground. Now, a lot of people are using girths to hold the saddle back. But if you look at the anatomical makeup of your equine, you'll find that the small intestine is in there. Mm-hmm. On females, that's where the uterus and the fallopian tubes and everything are. And when you use a girth there in that area, it creates compression on those internal organs. And that just cannot be good. It's going to inhibit the normal way that those internal organs operate.
Sure.
So you don't want to use that area to hold your saddle back. And we've talked about in our discussion about croupers and breeching, the difference between the two of them, and the difference between an inanimate load, in which case you would want to use a breeching, and a live load like a human being who does not necessarily have good riding balance, and how that can cause a lot of chafing with a breeching, which again will interfere with your leverage with the animal because they're going to be uncomfortable. If they learn when they're introduced to their saddle with a cripper, and one that does not have buckles down by the tail, and if it's adjusted properly, it allows the animal free range of motion again, undistracted, uninhibited, and they are comfortable in their attacking equipment, and they're less likely to get resistant with you. If you aren't able to find a cripper with the buckles up by the cantle, you can still use a cripper that has the buckles down by the tail, but you would need to either have your saddle maker adjust it and move those buckles up, or you can just wrap duct tape around the buckles so the tail can't get stuck in them.
That's what I did.
Yes. And because the animal is going to balance by keeping their head, neck, spine, and tail straight out in front on a straight line. And they bend through the torso on a gradual arc, but then that neck has to be able to do the arc smoothly and come back around with a duplication of that same arc on their tailbones, so that you have a symmetrical arc when they're turning, because that keeps the equal weight over all 4 feet. The other thing is when you're picking a mule to ride, then you want to make sure that you get a mule that's appropriate for your own size and weight. Overloading these guys will cause distraction. They will not be able to pay attention with you, and you will not be able to gain the leverage that you want for your training to go on resistance free. And all these things that I'm talking about interfere with the animal's ability to do what you ask. And that would be my definition of abuse.
Sure.
We don't intend to abuse our animals in these ways, but we don't have the knowledge to start with that pays attention to all these little details that make it ultimately really comfortable for your animal. So we encounter things, and we tend to try to use short-term fixes on these things, like chains, and hobbles are another thing that are used to restrict the animal. But the only time I ever use my hobbles is when I was doing body clipping for show. And even that had a lesson attached to it, too, because I would do the body because it was easier and they stood still more for it than they did for their face and their legs. So I'd do the body first, and then by that time they were tired of standing still. So when I got to the legs and the face, then they were fidgeting around and they wouldn't do what I wanted them to do. And then found I had to use the hobbles more often.
Yeah.
And so I put them on, and the double hobbles, doubling both front legs, didn't seem to work very well. So I got a short cotton rope and then just bent it one leg up and wrapped the rope around the knee, which put the weight on the other foot. And I found that they hopped a little bit when I hit the clippers on that leg that the weight was on. But mostly it was easier to do it that way. The other thing is then I had to do the back legs, and I used a restraint called the Scotch hobble. But I didn't just tie them up. I wanted to see how much resistance I was gonna get. So first I trained with the Scotch hobble without clipping, and just getting them to learn to lift those back legs for me. So with the Scotch hobble, what you do is you put that rope around their neck, and then you just take the long part and you get well behind them. And in order to, they might kick you at that stage. So you don't want to be too close behind in when you get that rope between their legs. So you just kind of go ahead and get behind them, ask them to step over. If you need a driving whip to get them to step over one step so that rope falls right between the back legs, then you go ahead and do that. And then you walk forward towards the shoulder where that rope around the neck is tied. And instead of going right to tying it and tying the foot up, try them a little bit first. Go ahead and tighten that rope up a little bit on their hind leg and try to lift it up with the rope. And this is where it's really important to use a cotton rope and not a nylon rope, because the nylon rope will chafe them, cause a rope burn. Don't want to do that. So a lot of mules will just go ahead and lift that leg for you. And then you just keep it's kind of a jerk, let loose, jerk, let loose, jerk, let loose until they really give and there's no tension lifting that leg. And then you kind of hold it there, step forward, hold the leg in your hand, at the pastern, and release the rope and set it down. And that's how I teach my animals to go ahead and allow me to lift the hind legs. Of course, I do this after they've had their kicking training, and that's covered in tape number 2. That's a whole different thing, but it gives you leverage by doing the kicking training. And all that is, in short, is running that lunging or the lunge whip or a driving whip up and down the legs and over the body, and then rewarding them for not kicking. You don't want them to kick you. And picking up feet can be a little different than just kicking out. So you have to take that first step before you start using the Scotch hobble to actually lift the foot. When you're doing clipping, that can be a whole different ball of wax. They might let you pick up the leg, but they may take exception to the clippers. So if they do, then you're going to have to tie that hind leg up to do that hind leg.
Yeah.
And you just go ahead and finish the tie and try tying the rope on the Scotch hobble so that they can keep a toe on the ground for balance. If they won't let you do that and they keep kicking at you anyway, then you're going to have to take the foot up off the ground. But every time you tie them up, you let a little bit more slack in that rope and a little bit more slack in the rope, because eventually we really do want them to not have to be tied up in the Scotch hobble at all.
Right.
And this is how you do what's called phasing out the restraint, is just each lesson, make it a little looser and allow them a little bit more freedom each time. And when you do that, they learn to be compliant, and pretty soon you don't need it at all. You have to realize in the course of doing all of this that you're doing, that anytime the animal is resistant to you, there's something that you're doing that's agitating them. They always have a completely honest response to what you're doing, and you need to know that. And if they're being a little bit resistant, then you have to think of another approach where it will not agitate them. Maybe you got to back up and maybe not do as much of tying up the Scotch hobble, for instance. Now, we've talked about the quick twist. in the very beginning here, and that's the best way to lead them. I do not, like I said, like chains. And actually, I only use 4 restraints in my training: the elbow pull, the quick twist, the Scotch hobble, and then a thing I call the face tie. And the face tie was in response to all the twitches they were using about the face by putting them on their upper lip and trying to hold them still. And I learned about that when I was breeding animals and had to put a twitch on the mare to get her to stand still for the jack. And works pretty well on a horse, but these mules or something else.
Forget it.
You try to put a twitch on a mule, and he will figure out how to undo it.
Yep.
You know, lots of people try to use the chain, and they will untwist the chain by untwisting their head. You know, and if you use the metal ones that don't have the chain on them, they'll just get their lip right to the widest part of it and pull it out. You know,
They're so talented.
they really, really are, and they're not stupid, not a bit.
That is the correct answer.
They, you know, to them, it's all a game. Oh, this person thinks she's got one up on me. Well, let me show you, you know. And so you find yourself sucked into these games. The thing I use for a lot of different things is the face tie. And when they don't want their wormer in the beginning and they decide they don't like that. Now, we've talked about how to go ahead and use this face tie, but the way you gain control with it is super important. You have to have a good solid hitch rail or a good solid post to tie them to. And at first, they will come up to it, and they might get 3 feet away from it, and they don't want to go any further, and they'll plant their feet, and that's it. And that's when you just go ahead and stand as close to the pole or as close to the hitch rail as you can, take the lead rope over and around it, and then ask them to come forward. And again, you use your fanny pack. They know the reward system. They know what's in that fanny pack. They know that if you say come here, that means come closer, because they've learned that in the obstacle leading training. So you're not really asking them to do anything they haven't already learned. But now, you know, we got a wormer we got to give them, or we have a shot we have to give them, or you might need to use this to teach a mule not to throw their head back and forth every time you try to take the bridle over their ears.
Sure.
You know, a lot of people go, oh, I'll just get a bridle that unfastens up there over the crown. But once again, you're conceding to the game. If you put the bridle on politely and considerately, then they will learn that you're not going to hurt them, and you'll be able to do it the right way. And you will have negotiated with them. You have used your own leverage by using this face tie thing. But getting back to getting them to the hitch rail, you just take up that slack a little bit at a time and feed them small handfuls of oats as they come forward. When they get to the hitch rail, for instance, you can go ahead and take that lead rope back through the halter noseband, around the hitch rail again, and then you can tie it off, and they can't move. Now, you don't do this with a horse. I might say this right away. Right. Horses have an entirely different response to a hard tie. But you can do it with mules, and you can do it with donkeys, and they will respect the hard tie. It's very, very useful. Now, occasionally, you have a very clever mule, and you walk up to give them a shot, for instance, and they only have their nose tied to the hitch rail. So they can swing those haunches right into you. And if they're really shy about shots, they will. And that's when you have to get really clever. You tie, like I said, to a hitch rail that's very, very stout. And my hitch rails were as big around as a small telephone pole. And they were anchored that way, too. The other nice thing about it, I might add, too, is with this face tie, you can get to the front of their face by standing on the other side of the hitch rail, because if their face is tied to it, they can't get their feet over it. They can't rear up and put their feet over it, so you got a pretty good position that you will have to use if you're doing bridle training. We covered that before in one of the other interviews, but what you need to do is just take it slowly, bring the crown piece up the middle of their forehead, put with your left hand, put your right hand around the far side ear in a cup. Don't squash the ear. Make it comfortable for them, and lift that crown up over that ear and have the crown piece slide over your hand and not their ear. And as it goes over your hand and gets closer to the pole, you can slide your hand out, and then you do the same thing with the other ear. And they can learn to be bridled that way because they will realize that you don't want to hurt them, and that you're taking every precaution to prevent that. And so, they learn from your polite approach to these things, then they're more willing to do it. And as you use this face tie, for instance, each time that you use it, you make it a little bit looser and give them a little bit more freedom. Now, there's just a couple more things about leverage that I want to talk about, too, is that minis can be all over the place. They are so tiny that every time you try to do something, they're like grease lightning, and they can go from one place to another, and just trying to get to the right position is a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
And that's saying it mildly, Now, the face tie works really well and everything when you've got a specific task, but it doesn't help you very much with the farrier. And your animals need to be compliant to the farrier and the vet, so they have to learn to be nice. I have found that minis respond to you getting down to their eye level. If you are there, they're not going to rear back and strike at you or anything like that, unless you ask for it by being, by invading their space. But if you give them enough leverage and I start in their pens, and I put their halters on, and then we go out in the pen, and again, I'm wearing the fanny pack, and I go ahead and let them get to the end of the lead rope, and then I drop to my knees, and I ask them to come to me. And then I show them the oats. Yes, I still have the fanny pack on. It's just a little lower. That's all. And we kind of play on the ground that way first before we do anything like bridling or putting on harness or even with the farrier. And when the farrier comes, we started in the pen where they had learned that I was going to get down on their level. And then the farrier walked out there with me while I was rewarding them with me sitting there on my knees. And he came up beside me and he got on his knees. And he did them on his knees. We didn't go get a platform to put them on to raise them up to our level. We came down to their level, and they appreciated it. And I've had a wonderful response from people who have tried this on their own minis, and they're having tremendous success.
Good.
The other thing that people like is convenience. And a lot of these farriers have gotten into using power tools.
Right.
That is an absolute no-no. If you're trying to get your animal in balance, you start with the feet. And power tools, you cannot control enough to make sure that what it's doing is going to leave that foot in balance.
Right.
This demands hands-on custom sculpting with each foot on each individual equine. And every equine is different, and every foot is different. So if you want your minis to stay calm for trims and everything, keep everything at eye level, reward their good behavior, make the farrier get down too, and just do it like that, and if he has to roll over and sit on his butt in between feet, so be it. You can always sit there and feed them more oats, and they love that.
I think this power tool demonstration, I think that's more for entertainment, and then they can charge more for their services.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just more of that crony capitalism and trying to awe people, and people think that means that they're really a pro of it. No, the real pro pays attention to detail.
Exactly.
And negotiates with their equine and makes it a mutual cooperation thing with the goal of eliminating resistance.
Yes.
That's the most important thing. And it's always better to take the necessary time to implement the training techniques that allow your equine to learn and grow in a logical, step-by-step process that will not overwhelm him or bombard him with too much stimulus at any stage, so he can become comfortable and cooperative. And if you use the correct methods right from the beginning, the need for excessive restraints can cause pain, and even more resistance will be greatly diminished, and the long-term results will be undeniably better.
This is amazing. Okay, Meredith, do you have any books or training videos that go along with what we talked about today?
I'm glad you reminded me. This kind of stuff is covered in several different places, starting with my first book, Training Mules and Donkeys, A Logical Approach to Long Ears. There's an entire chapter on restraints. In my blue manual, Training Without Resistance, it is covered in part 2, which coincides with video number 2. And you can find all the information on restraints there as well. And it complements all of the training sequences that we've done. And it's put in its proper place in these books. So you have to keep in mind that there are things you need to do to lead up to the harder things you need to do where you might need to use the restraints.
Well, Meredith, thank you again and for coming back on. We will talk soon.
Sounds good. It's always my pleasure.
So, Meredith, you have a website.
I do. My website is at www.lucky3ranch.com, and that's spelling out 3, not the number 3. I have another website for children because I believe that they need to learn how to handle animals at a young age. Right. I have a Facebook page at Meredith Hodges, public figure Facebook page. I actually have 2 of them. I have a friends page too, but it's maxed out at 5,000. But I put the same thing on both Facebook pages, so you won't miss anything. And if you do have questions or concerns and you've looked at the website and you can't find your answers, feel free to email me at meredith@lucky3ranch.com or call me at 800-816-7566. And if you don't get me straight up, leave a message. I answer every email, every letter, and every phone call.
What is the website for children? I don't think we gave that out.
Okay, the website for children is JasperTheMule.com.
There you go. All right. Meredith, you have a wonderful day, and we will talk soon.
Thank you. Okay, don't wear those waders anymore. But you sure look cute in them.
Oh, you're funny.
If you'd like to be a guest on the show or sponsor, send me an email.
everycowgirlsdream@gmail.com.
Gotta go. My mule is looking for me.
Mule Talk is an Every Cowgirl's Dream production.